Today's guest is Yasmin Sheikh. Yasmin is the founder of Diverse Matters, which seeks the promotion of the values of equality, diversity, and inclusivity in organizations. Over 8 years experience as a successful and sought-after executive coach, trainer, consultant, speaker, mentor, combined with a background as a lawyer practicing for 12 years in a large international law firm, enabling professional people to achieve peak performance in inclusive workplace cultures, established expertise in diversity issues, specializing in disability issues in workplace via speaking, tailored webinars, workshops, events, and coaching. Yasmin is also the former vice chair of the Disability Solicitors Network at the Law Society and a multi-award winning international speaker, TEDx speaker, and has recently been awarded an Honorary Doctor of Law from the University of Law for her work. Yasmin, welcome to Pashu Talk Equity Matters.
Thank you. Pleasure to be here.
Yasmin, let's go back to the very beginning. Let's talk about your early life and education.
Okay, what do you want to know?
No, where were you born, your school,
Okay.
your grown up?
Yeah. So I was born in Essex, and no, I do not wear white stilettos, just to get that out there. Don't fit the stereotype, if there is a stereotype. I was born in Essex, and I went to a school around there. I was there for about 20 odd years, and then moved to Wimbledon in 2005. And I've been around that area ever since, really, to the present day. Yeah.
So over these years, you might have seen some changes around you. Is there any childhood memories that stuck up?
Yeah, I mean, I'm sort of relating to this topic of diversity and inclusion. And I felt like I was in a minority group back in Essex, actually. For background, I'm mixed race. So my dad is Pakistani, my mum is white, she's from Switzerland. And at school, there were some Asian people, but, you know, not many mixed race children. And I did feel very different to my peers. I didn't really experience, I would say, blatant discrimination over hostile comments or anything like that. My feelings of discomfort were a bit more subtle. You know, the food that I ate at home, dal and roti for breakfast, you know, little things like that where I felt different and I had a different background and culture. And sometimes, you know, when you're at school, we tend to want to assimilate. We want to be like everybody else. We're discovering our, you know, individuality, but actually you just want to be like everybody else and not stick out. And I was quite conscious of the fact that I had a different background, a different culture, and sometimes that clashed with other people's upbringing. And so I remember I feel embarrassed to say this now, but I felt a little bit of shame about my background. Now I absolutely love the fact that I have two cultures, a different perspective on life. And I find that very rich, actually. And I'm really, you know, I'm very comfortable with who I am and embrace both sorts of cultures as well and backgrounds. But at the time, I was kind of struggling to find out who I was in a sort of majority white area, majority white school as well. And I was very conscious of my difference. And I think that kind of, you know, is the background to why I'm very interested in this subject. And I'm sure later on we will talk about the fact that then I became disabled, you know, at the age of 29 and being a wheelchair user. After my injury, that actually sort of made me think about this subject even more deeply, because now I am very much a very visible minority in a world that doesn't really cater or think about disabled people in a conscious way. A lot of the sort of adjustments or the accommodations we make are very reactive rather than building in inclusivity from the outset. So yes, that's my background and has led me to doing the work that I do today.
So growing up in that multicultural society or multicultural family, you went on to do your law degree. Was it a conscious decision? I want to be a lawyer at a very early age, or how was that?
Yeah, well, I think a lot of people who come from an Asian background, there's a lot of truth in this, is that you know, your parents will want you to do one of three things, typically, okay? Lawyer, doctor, accountant. Well, I became the lawyer, my brother became the accountant. So my dad was very happy. I remember saying I wanted to do media studies, didn't go down well at all. But he was a lawyer, and actually he hugely influenced the way I actually really did want to do law. And I could see that he was involved in some really interesting cases. We would often discuss some of his cases, litigation, human rights issues. You know, that was a common topic at the dinner table, much to the annoyance of my mum and brother, who were couldn't get a word in edgeways, basically, or probably weren't as interested as my dad and I were in these subjects. But I always had that passion for, you know, social justice and interested in people. And the law fitted very nicely with those sort of ideas and values that I had. So yeah, really loved my law degree. I did that at Queen Mary University in London. And my dad actually did his LLM, his master's there as well. So that was a very proud moment for him when I did my LLB law degree there. Yeah.
So that's amazing. I think personal influence and also getting into law. But once you entered law, was there any specialism that you undertook? And talk us through your early careers.
Yeah, so I always knew I wanted to be a litigator. I wasn't really very good or very interested in doing non-contentious work, which didn't involve an element of litigation. So ironically, I ended up specialising in personal injury law. Firstly, I worked for a firm called Thompson Solicitors, which is a big firm. Many, I think they've got about 20 firms now all over the country, and they're a lot, you know, they do a lot of work, trade union work. So it was acting for claimants, the people who were injured through personal injury. I was there for a couple of years after becoming qualified as a solicitor, and then I went to the so-called, they call it the dark side, and acted for defendants, so insurance companies. And I was at what was called Barlow, Lyden, Gilbert then, and then merged with Clyde & Co. And I remained there for 10 years until I set my own consultancy up.
Nice. So March 2008. Let's talk us through. And you know, you have been progressing, enjoying, you know, family, beautiful family around you, career going fine, and then suddenly stuff happens. Talk us through what happened.
Yeah, so on the 18th of March 2008, which is a date which is firmly engraved in my mind, and a lot of people who've experienced a life-changing event, you'll always remember the date because that's when things changed overnight for me. So at the time I was 29, working at Barlow, Lyden, Gilbert, as it was called then, as a personal injury lawyer, defendant work, very fit and healthy. I still am, but went to the gym probably 4 or 5 times a week, really conscious about exercise and my body. I've been largely a vegetarian for most of my adult life, actually, since university. And, you know, no health issues, no family history. And I went to bed a fit 29-year-old woman on the 18th of March 2008. And within probably 2 or 3 hours, I couldn't get out of bed at all. My legs just simply stopped working and stopped moving. And I remember calling my parents, who lived down the road at about 10-minute drive at the time. I was living in a flat in Wimbledon at the time. And they came over and we phoned the ambulance, got to St. George's Hospital in Tooting, and I met my consultant, Dr. Pereira, who was at St. George's, a neurologist. Still remember him very vividly to this day. He had wild curly hair and he wore glasses right at the end of his nose. And he basically said to me, Yasmin, you have had a spinal stroke. You know, we've done all the tests, lumbar puncture, MRI scan, blood tests, come to the conclusion that you've had a stroke of the spinal cord. It wasn't something I'd ever heard of. And he said, you know, if you come to me the day before, I'd say there's 0.001% chance of this happening. You're going to have to use a wheelchair for the rest of your life. Now, I remember distinctly feeling like he's talking about somebody else. This is not about me. I can't envisage life in a wheelchair. I felt a range of emotions, anger, denial, complete disbelief. And I remember crying quite hysterically, and my mum and dad were on either side of me. And we just were bereft. We just didn't understand what was going on. I often say I was the first disabled person I met. I feel like I'm talking about another person now because it's 15 years later and I think about my new life and, you know, my new normal very, very differently. But at the time, it was very, very frightening. I didn't know anybody else in a wheelchair. I consumed all the same messages that everybody else does in society about disability. You know, what we see in the media, what we read about, the representation that people have or don't have, the stories we read. And all of those images for me at that time, when I didn't know any different, was very, very negative. I could not envisage having a fulfilling and happy life whilst living in a wheelchair. I just didn't understand how that could be. So my future, my thoughts around that was, it's over. I just don't know how to live. You know, will I marry? Will I have children? Will I go back to work? Will I travel? All the things that made me Yasmin, I just couldn't imagine a new Yasmin in this new body.
Mm-hmm.
And then I did go back to work. I had to go for rehabilitation for 3 months at Stanmore Hospital, where you learn not how to walk again, because in my situation was, you know, we didn't know at that time, actually, would I regain some movement? Would I walk? Would I have some mobility? It was then focusing on the here and now. You are now in a wheelchair. You may regain something, but you've got to live as you are now. So how do you live independently using a wheelchair? And my body has changed now. My spinal cord injury affects just not walking, it's your other bodily functions. A lot of people in the spinal cord injury community say, weirdly, the not walking is the least of the issues. It can affect your bladder and other bodily functions. You've got to learn how to use your body in a new way. So rehab teaches you all of that, how to be independent, how to use your body, how your spinal cord injury affects different parts of your body and how you do that. But then it was a huge psychological adjustment. Am I now a disabled person? You know, I saw myself differently. Other people, when I got into society, saw me differently. They talked to me differently. They had different expectations of me. And I had to navigate a completely different world. So I was off work for a year, moved back to my parents because my flat wasn't accessible anymore. No lift on the second floor. So everything changed about my life. Moving back with your parents at the age of 29 is not cool either. You know, as much as I love my parents and they've been a great support, I found that very, very difficult. And it was disabling in the sense that, you know, we had to install a stair lift, which meant that I couldn't just nip downstairs. I had to rely on them to get me water, to get me things. You know, it takes away so much of your independence, just the way things are set up for you. And then I did go back to work and, you know, had mixed experiences. I don't want to speak too much about work because obviously, you know, it was quite a difficult time, I think. You know, overall enjoyed it, but I'm glad that I'm doing the work that I'm doing now. I find it much more meaningful and hopefully affecting change. But I'll stop there because I'm talking a lot. You may have another question, but that's what happened really in March 2008.
Wow, Yasmin, I can imagine, because, you know, if it happened, I know this should not happen to anyone, but if it happened from birth, then at least you are used to it to a certain extent. But with somebody who's going 5 days to a gym and next day morning you're in a wheelchair, that's tough. And only you know what you went through. And thank you for sharing, Yasmin. That's very profound. And talking about wheelchair, you know, as you rightly said, certain things that we take it for granted, you know, as you rightly said, getting a tea, getting a coffee, going to the toilets, doing anything and everything we don't even think it as a task. How is it wheelchair? You know, like, how was that shift? Being in wheelchair, doing all the stuff that...
Yeah, it's hard to articulate it. I mean, with any change in life, you know, I often say this, if you go through a divorce, when you go through a bereavement, you are questioning your own sense of identity. Who am I now? How do other people see me? You know, it changes you. Now, I had to deal with very physical changes to my body, and you know, now it's normal. You know, I don't think about it. It's, you know, the way I dress, the way I move around. It's just what I do. I've done it for 15 years. It's other people's attitudes that actually I find more disabling, which, you know, this is me now. This is what I do. And the early days, obviously, with any change, because it's so dramatic, it was overnight. And I had 29 years of not experiencing being a disabled person. It was obviously a huge adjustment. And you do go through like a bereavement process, anger, denial. And, you know, but now it's through the help of rehab and advance in medical science and technology, you know, I'm living a healthy and very fulfilling life. But yeah, there are challenges with being disabled. You know, I am very, very fortunate. I have access to good healthcare. I'm in a good financial position. Being disabled is expensive. On average, I think about £500 extra for a disabled person, because, you know, you've got to buy equipment, technology. I mean, my wheelchair alone, carbon fiber wheelchair, is about £7,000. And I got some support from the Access to Work, which is a government scheme. They contributed about £1,000. Luckily, I'm in a position I can afford the best wheelchair, you know, which is super light. If you've got a heavy, clunky chair, you feel even more disabled, you know, moving that around. It's heavy on your shoulders, it's clunky, you know, you're not as nippy to move in and out of spaces. So there is a lot that I have, a lot of privilege I have to make my life more comfortable and make the world more accessible to me. But not everybody has that advantage. So.
Totally. Yasmin, I think, as you rightly said, it's a perception of others that disturb you more than. But what advice would you give people who have a disabled colleague, or you see somebody disabled in a wheelchair, in the transport or at work, or anybody else? What do you think they should? What advice do you have for them?
Yeah. So when I give, because I do a lot of training in organizations, large and small, private and public sector, and there is a lot of discomfort around disability. I get it. You know, we are worried about saying the wrong thing, worrying about offending people, worrying about perhaps using outdated, non-inclusive language. And, you know, it's okay to make a mistake, first of all. You won't be judged by the mistake if someone is to take offense or behave in a way that isn't fully inclusive. You'll be judged by your response to it. So, you know, have humility. Listen to people. Say, thank you for telling me, I didn't know that, and just learn from it and move on. Because, you know, if we double down and get very prickly and defensive, oh, you've taken it the wrong way, or something like that, then actually you're not listening to the person with that experience. You know, I can be challenged on things. You know, people will say to me, actually, I prefer this terminology to that terminology, or actually this is, and I'll say, you know, thank you for telling me, that's interesting. I didn't sort of think of it like that. And you learn from those experiences. And that's hard because it takes introspection. It takes us to stop being defensive and actually think, okay, you might not agree with it, but actually think, okay, that's your experience. I'll take that on board and thank you. I know better for next time. The second thing I'd say is, and what I teach people as well in my training, is getting to know about the concept of the medical model of disability and the social model. So if you're not familiar with those terms, it's the models of disability is essentially the way in which we see society sees disability, the lens in which it looks at it. So the medical model begins with the premise that it's the disabled person or the disability that is the problem. That's the disabling thing. That the problem lies with them. They are somehow deficient. There's something wrong with them, in inverted commas, defective. They're the problem. The social model completely turns the medical model on its head. It says that what disables people is not the disability. What actually disables them is society and the barriers put in place by society. Now, some of those barriers I've spoken about, they could be attitudinal, a soft bigotry of low expectation, an assumption about what people can or mostly what they can't do because of their disability. That's what disables them. Another disabling barrier for people could be just the way that things are set up, the environment, the physical environment. You know, so the medical model will say, you know, someone in a wheelchair, you can't get into a building, you're the problem. You can't walk, you're mobility impaired, the problem lies with you. Social model will actually identify the barrier and say, well, actually, what is disabling them? Okay, what is the barrier? The lack of access. If the person could access that building via lift, via ramp, they could move around just like everybody else. That's what's disabling them. So, you know, when we're interacting with our disabled colleagues and we have nervousness or discomfort around disability and health, is to look at disability via the social model. Because the beauty of the social model is you don't need to know everything about the disability. The questions we ask our colleagues are not intrusive medical questions like, tell me everything about your disability, what happened to you, which I get sometimes from strangers, which is one, deeply intrusive, two, not very helpful because people may have the same condition and it could manifest in different ways. The questions are very much via the social model. Tell me about your barriers. Tell me what challenges you're experiencing. What barriers can we identify, whether they be environmental, physical, attitudinal, infrastructure, policy, technology, what's getting in the way, and how can we seek to remove those barriers? And that almost takes it outside of the disability. It's saying what disables people is the way society is set up. And that is a more helpful model for people to talk about these issues more comfortably, and sort of removes the need to over medicalize, because you're not expected to be doctors. I often say to people, in my lifetime, the reality is I won't walk. I'm okay with that. It's other people who have an issue with that. They try and fix that, or, they're sort of very preoccupied with the not walking bit. Actually, the social model is something that you can do something about. You can make my experience more inclusive, whether it be the physical environment, whether it be the way you approach me, your attitude, whether it be technology to assist me, whether it be, coming into work at a certain time, maybe I need a little bit more flexibility there. So we can actually do something about the barriers. We can't do something about someone's impairment or condition or disability, but we can actually do something to change their experiences, to change their environment. That's something we have within our power to do. So focus on that, rather than always trying to sort of fix the disability or show pity or concern around that person's impairment or disability. Focus on actually what is disabling them. So that's quite a helpful model for people if they're nervous about this subject and how to talk about it. And that's where reasonable adjustments come in a lot of the time if we're talking about workplaces, how to overcome barriers.
Wow, that's a very profound advice. Thank you, Yasmin. Yasmin, coming from, yes, as you rightly said, you are now comfortable with who you are. It's been 15 years. Now you're empowering others on this subject as well. In addition to that, how much understanding law, understanding disability, it brings a totally different perspective on the subject, right? What does law and disability and the government, anything that says about this?
So this is interesting. So the Equality Act, there's listed 9 protected characteristics. One of those is disability. So disabled people are protected from discrimination, disability discrimination. And it's interesting because a lot of people don't realise that the definition of disability under the Equality Act is pretty broad. So, for example, some people may not identify with the label of disabled person, but they may be legally disabled. So, for example, the Act specifies 3 conditions: cancer, multiple sclerosis, and HIV. And it says, actually, you don't need to fit within the definition of disability laid out in the Equality Act, but actually you are automatically classed as disabled from the point of diagnosis if you experience any of those 3 conditions, and that protection is lifelong. So, for example, someone who is in remission from cancer, someone who may be symptom-free, the Act says that doesn't matter. You are still considered legally disabled under the Equality Act. That protection kicks in from the point of diagnosis. That protection is lifelong. Now, I suspect a lot of people who are living with cancer or have had cancer in the past do not identify with the label of disability or disabled. There is something perhaps negative for them with that word, or they just don't readily fit into that group, or they don't think they do. But actually, under the Equality Act, this is where the law is different. You are actually protected from discrimination. Your employer has a duty to make a reasonable adjustment for you as well. So language is very interesting. I did some work with a law firm very recently, and we tried to capture data and find out how many disabled people work within that organization. So we asked the first question, do you have a disability, yes or no? 2% of people identify with that label. We then asked it a different way, do you have a disability or long-term health condition? 25% of people identify with that label. And therefore, when I teach people about what the Equality Act definition of disability is, actually it broadens their mind, because, you know, it could be people with depression, dyslexia, dyspraxia, ADHD, autism. If they fit within that definition, they could be considered legally disabled. Now, that's not best practice. Actually says, you know, don't actually, if people are in your organization, don't sort of say, well, do you neatly fit within this definition of disability under the law? Best practice would move beyond that and say, look at the spirit of the law. Because under the Equality Act, for example, to be disabled, legally disabled, it has to be long-term, the condition. And long-term is 12 months or expected to last for 12 months. Now, say you've got someone in your organization who's experiencing symptoms but no diagnosis, or they're experiencing symptoms less than 12 months. It wouldn't constitute long-term under the Equality Act. However, they're still going to be, you know, experiencing barriers in the workplace. You know, someone who's injured their leg in a skiing accident, they break their leg, probably not going to be mobility impaired or in plaster for 12 months, probably 6 to 8 weeks. But maybe they're experiencing challenges, you know, getting into work during rush hour, needing to have rest periods or breaks, experiencing pain or fatigue, needing sometimes some hospital appointments. You know, we would meet people where they're at. As inclusive employers, best practice would say, don't look at the letter of the law, look at the spirit of the law, meet people where they're at. So, you know, I only show people the Equality Act definition of disability so that people understand, actually, this is not just sticks and wheelchairs disability. This is a much broader category. 97% of disabilities are actually non-visible. So a lot of people don't realize that, but they don't identify with the label, but actually they could be legally disabled under the Equality Act. Oh, you're on mute. We had to do that once, didn't we?
Totally. Thank you, Yasmin. So that was very useful, Yasmin, because, you know, that was very profound. So, Yasmin, disability in a part of law society, you also play a very vital role there as Disabled Solicitors Network Vice Chair. Talk us through how important is that and any initiatives.
Yeah, so I'm the former Vice Chair of the Disabled Solicitors Network. Formerly, we were called the Lawyers with Disabilities Division. And I was Vice Chair for probably 4 years, something like that. But I'm still a member of the committee. And we are, I mean, the Law Society essentially represents the body of solicitors in England and Wales. And we have various networks, and Disability Network is one of them, to represent legal disabled professionals. Now, we did some research, which was quite interesting and groundbreaking. It was the first research of its kind with Cardiff University, which looked at the career experiences of disabled legal professionals, whether they had a visible or a non-visible disability. And these were people from all different levels of seniority: paralegals, solicitors, judges, barristers, you know, all different stages of their career. We interviewed around 300 of them. And what we found, you know, the brilliant research, so it's www.legallydisabled.com, I think is the website where you can find the findings and the recommendations. But we found that pre-pandemic, the most requested and refused reasonable adjustment was home working and flexible working for disabled people. Now, lo and behold, we have a pandemic and we've had to rethink the way we work now. You know, most people, if they can, are working hybridly. They're working in a hybrid fashion, so not going into the office every single day. Most people I talk to, whether they have a disability or not, will say, how did we actually do that commute every single day? How did we actually work in this way? It took a pandemic for us to shift the way we think about how we work now, how we show up, how productive is it, how effective is it? Should we, you know, Zoom calls and Teams meetings, you know, this is the norm now, but it took a pandemic for us to rethink that. Now, that just shows you about the social model and the medical model, because prior to that, disabled people really had to fight for that adjustment. And it was seen as, oh, this is just reserved for senior people, perhaps partners in the legal profession. You know, you really had to justify why you needed it. And now over 70% of the respondents in that survey said, this has been, the fact that we can work from home or work flexibly has been life-changing, because we can manage our disability at home. We don't have to fit into the traditional way of working, the 9 to 5. Maybe we'll start earlier, finish up, you know, we can work at our own pace, whether managing fatigue or pain. We don't have to fit into this kind of ableist way of working. Also, we don't have to navigate in an inaccessible transport system. It was news to me when I started using a wheelchair. I couldn't even get onto the underground. My usual route to work, I physically could not get on. It wasn't built for someone with me in mind. It's an old system. And so, you know, that was a barrier. I had to find a different way to travel. And so disabled people in that survey said, we are able to sort of manage our disability and work at our own pace and still be highly productive and effective. But we don't have to sort of get into the office every single day, which can be exhausting even before you get in. And sort of, you know, the law is traditionally very wedded to traditional ways of working. And so that is changing now. So the legally disabled research and the work we do at Disabled Solicitors Network is really highlighting. Disabled people knew about this anyway, about our experiences and discrimination and ways of working that weren't always overtly discriminatory, but actually they did disable people. And now we're having a much more honest discussion about, you know, how can people work now more effectively and productively? So that's just one of the things, that's big pieces of research that have really moved the needle in this area of disability inclusion.
Got it. Thank you for sharing, Yasmin. And this disability confidence scheme from the government, you know, I mean, like, yes, we see most large companies who work with government or government suppliers and others tend to have this disability confidence schemes. You know, I mean, like, is this something that's making a difference, or recruiting, hiring, and also retaining these people? What's happening there?
Yeah. So I don't know the intricate details of the scheme, but I do know the basics. So the Disability Confidence Scheme is to ensure that employers can recruit and retain disabled people and people with health conditions. And, you know, a lot of organizations, the benefit of the scheme is that a lot of organizations want to be better at recruiting and retaining disabled talent, but don't know where to start. So the scheme is a good starting point. It gives you a framework to work within. And there are 3 levels of the scheme. And everybody comes in at level 1 and then progresses to level 3. And you've got to do various things. As you increase in confidence with disability, you increase up the levels as well. And so it gives you stuff to do and within a framework to work within, which is quite useful for people who want to be better at this. Also, you can then use the Disability Confident logo on your website, which indicates to disabled people that, you know, this organization is serious about this subject. They want to progress and get more confident and competent in the area of disability inclusion. It would give me confidence as a disabled person to apply to that firm as well, thinking they're consciously thinking about how to improve this for people. Also, another aspect of the scheme is there's the guaranteed interview scheme. So what that means is if you declare that you have a disability, then if you meet the minimum requirements for a job, then you are guaranteed an interview under the Disability Confidence Scheme. Now, the point of that is to level the playing field. We know that, you know, disabled people will experience all sorts of barriers getting into the workplace, getting an interview, just the way, you know, the recruitment system or people's biases or prejudices. Yes, we've got the law, but these things still do creep in. And therefore, the scheme is hoping to level the playing field, at least getting people's foot in the door to say, well, you've met the minimum requirement, you are guaranteed an interview under the scheme. So that's the essence of it. I think the criticism of the scheme is that, you know, it's like marking your own homework, that you then are able to submit evidence as to why you should get up to level 3 and you're self-assessing. I think that's one of the criticisms. Another one is you don't even have to employ a single disabled person to be, you know, say you're disability confident. But I do think there are some benefits. It gets you started, it gives you a framework, and you're able to put on your website the logo, which will give disabled people a little bit more confidence applying. So there's sort of pros and cons with it, but overall, I think it's a good initiative.
Thank you, Yasmin. Thank you for sharing. Yasmin, now you have your unique background now, and you're using your uniqueness and making a positive difference in the field. Talk us about diverse matters or diverse matters and your initiatives.
Yeah. So a lot of my work is doing conversations like this. So the work that I love is keynote speeches at organizations, what is diversity, what is inclusion, disability inclusion, all of that, facilitating those conversations with people, whether they be HR, line managers, recruitment, all of that. A lot of it is training. So it could be in-person training, a lot of online training, it could be general training to all staff, what is disability, give people knowledge and awareness of what constitutes a disability under the law. How do we get people to feel more comfortable sharing what their barriers are, challenges, how to ask for reasonable adjustments. The onus shouldn't always be on the individual disabled person to do the work. Organizations should make places more comfortable for people to talk about adjustments, to normalize these conversations, to standardize it so that people can actually you can get the best out of people. So it's really how to shift cultures, how to have this conversation, what the law is, and really how to recruit and retain the best talent, which includes disabled people as well. So a lot of my work is facilitation work, training, speaking, webinars. I organize events as well. So all sorts of things. Yeah.
Nice. Please do continue to share and make a positive environment, Yasmin, 100%. So, Yasmin, how can we empower? Because I know you stood up, and you're a beacon of hope for many people who are not doing it. But how do you empower disabled people in wheelchairs? I mean, with different backgrounds, especially in your case, you had the law behind you, and you're motivated to do that. But not many people had that background, and they are still. How can we empower these people with different backgrounds and views, to just come forward and share and thrive?
That's a very, very difficult question. And it's hard for me to answer because I have the benefit and the knowledge of having the resources, the support, the fact that I qualified as a lawyer prior to that. So, I don't have the barriers of people entering the legal profession as a disabled person. So it's a different experience to mine, and they have to navigate all of that. I think a few things. So find your tribe. So what I mean by that is when I first became disabled, I was very reluctant to hang out with other disabled people. I actually recoiled at the thought. I thought, well, I'm not like them. And, I had a problem with myself. But actually, when you find people, not that you're saying you meet other people in wheelchairs, you've got loads in common with them, because the only thing that you could have in common is the wheelchair. But actually, I found people where I get on with them anyway, but they understand the challenges. We can share a sense of humor that other people probably wouldn't get. I find that very cathartic. They can talk through things, scenarios they've dealt with that can support me. So don't worry about shying away from people like that. Actually embrace that, whether it be an online community, whether it be a charity. I'm very heavily connected with a charity called Backup, which supports people with spinal cord injuries. And I found a really good network of friends. I'm an ambassador for them. I do a lot of work with them, volunteering work, and it gives me enormous amount of joy and laughter and friendship. So, for people perhaps with a different background, but they use a wheelchair, Backup is great in terms of somebody who's a wheelchair user. If you've got a spinal cord injury, or indeed any other charity or network that can support you with your disability and meet like-minded people. So find your tribe. And then another exercise I've done is reframing your disability. So often we think of all the negative things, what you can't do. And I still have to do this on a daily basis sometimes, to remind myself how fortunate I am. Ask different questions, not what happened to me or why has this happened to me, is what's been good that's come out of this? And that's a very hard question sometimes when you've had a significant life event. What's been good about this? Well, I can name many, many things. I've changed my career. I'm doing something that I love, that I think I'm pretty good at. I wouldn't have said that before, but, you know, I think I'm good at facilitating, speaking, making people feel comfortable. I've really found my thing, and it gives me so much joy and pleasure. And it lights me up. You can probably tell I talk quite quickly. I'm very passionate about this subject. But what's been good about this? For you, it might be different things. You know, it's given you a different perspective. You found a friendship group that you hadn't before. You've appreciated things. You know, what's been good? And that can be hard. But really, you know, it's not to say sometimes we have bad days and sometimes things can be really annoying and challenging. And I still have those days. It's called being a human being, whatever our background. But I try and focus on actually what has been a benefit to having a different life, a different experience. And I try and bring all of that together to really lead a fulfilling life. So hopefully those two bits of advice can help people.
Thank you, Yasmin. That was useful. Yasmin, personally for you, what are some of the resources or people that you're looking to, or any members that have helped you or who have inspired you, continue to inspire you?
Yeah, so I would say in the early days when I was a newly injured person, when I was not very happy at work and feeling I don't really fit in here and this is not my passion anymore, and I really feel there's something I could do that I'd be really good at and be fulfilled in my career, is that there were other disability consultants out there who were doing the work I essentially do now, is speaking, facilitating, training. And I sort of looked to them and observed them and asked to shadow them and get some experience. And, you know, they were huge role models to me, because, you know, the expression, if you see it, then you believe you can be it. And they were doing something I thought I can do that. And that really excited me. Other than that, there's, you know, influential women in the law that role models for me. There's too many to, you know, I can't think of one single, but there's so many of them out there that are fighting for equality, for justice, talking about sort of the similar issues that I'm talking about. That yeah, you just, there's lots of people to mention, but lots of feminists and people in this space, you know, talking about equality and diversity and inclusion.
Nice. I'm glad that you have so much abundance around you that
Yeah.
helps you going.
Yeah.
But on the flip side, what we also find is many of these things are done at what they call face value, where, you know, they just say they are X, Y, Z. But when you dig down, there's nothing that disturbs them. I mean, like, from your opinion, how can we measure the impact of people's EI efforts or the effort? Because otherwise, you see, find more and more in social media, people talk the talk, but when you dig them, it's quite.
Yeah, there's a lot of it's very performative, isn't it? So, you know, there can be people celebrating pride events in organizations or various sort of disability history month or something like that. And, you know, that's all good. It raises awareness, it gets people talking. But really, to measure the impact is talk to your workforce, you know, talk to the Disability Network or the other networks. There's a mantra, nothing about us without us. If you want to know about, you know, what's going on, if you want to affect change, whether it be when we're designing buildings, when we're designing policies, speak to the people with that experience, that lived experience, you know, because you all have gaps in your knowledge and awareness about things that don't impact you, but they could profoundly, disproportionately impact other groups. So the way we measure impact is speak to those networks, or, you know, do an employee survey, feedback, so that people can really honestly share what is it actually like to work in this organization, because sometimes it's very incongruent. You know, people say they have the values of diversity, equity, inclusion on the website or things like that, but actually it doesn't match the experiences that people have, and that can be really quite isolating. You think it's just performative and it doesn't reflect actually what I'm experiencing on a day-to-day basis. Another problem is the larger the organization, it can be a postcode lottery. You could have brilliant policies, you know, brilliant sort of overall culture. But if you've got that boss or line manager in your department that doesn't really get it, is quite, you know, disparaging as well, or sort of overlooks you, that can be a very isolating experience, and it doesn't match the experience of perhaps other people in a different department. And it's quite hard to sort of, and that's where training comes in, that's where calling out behavior that isn't inclusive, is not tolerated. That's how allies can step up. So there's no one single magic, silver bullet. There's lots of things that we can do, but to measure the impact is to ensure that staff are listened to, that the networks are properly resourced, that they are able to feed into HR as to what really is going on within, the workforce, and listening to people. It's a very underutilized skill. It's actually listening to people with the experiences.
100%. Thank you, Yasmin. Yasmin, finally, what are some of the common myths and misconceptions about disability in the workplace that you have either encountered, or you would like to challenge, or you would like to share?
Yeah, that's a very good question. One of the myths is we have this idea that equality is about treating everyone the same. It's not. Equality is sometimes treating people differently. What I mean by that is not in a discriminatory kind of way, but recognizing that me, for example, as a wheelchair user, needs very different things from people. It's not about lowering the bar or, giving me special treatment. It's about recognizing I maybe need to come into work a little bit later and maybe work later. I maybe have to have a different structure in order to perform at my best. So because it takes me longer to get ready in the morning because of my disability, getting in at a certain time may not work for me. Similarly, someone with autism, someone who's autistic, they may have sensory overload. And so working in an open plan office may not just work for them. It's the policy you apply to everybody, but maybe they need noise cancellation headphones. Maybe they need a separate office. It's not treating them, giving them special treatment. It's recognizing people have different needs. And in order to enable them to thrive, is giving them that adjustment so it levels the playing field. So that's one myth, is you can treat people differently. Another one is just don't make assumptions. People talk to me very differently now. When I was in a wheelchair, before I was in a wheelchair, it was, what do you do? People now say to me, do you work?
Oh.
There's a soft bigotry of low expectation. The assumption, again, very well intentioned, is you don't work, do you? And sometimes our biases can play out in the workplace. Very, very well intentioned, no malice behind it, no ill will, but we can overlook people for talent because of the way they present, the way they look. And we can, rather than leaning in and having a conversation and assuming that they're unable to do something, or not interested, or not even thinking about them at all, we don't even go there. We don't ask them what their aspirations are. How could we do this job? What adjustments could we do? We don't lean into that conversation. And when you're left out of that conversation, or not even thought of at all, that can be a very isolating experience, where you really then, you can internalize those feelings. You think, actually, I'm not very valuable here. It can be a bit of a vicious cycle. So yeah, that's a myth, that we may assume that people, because of their disability or health condition, that they're not interested, or they're not capable, or, again, this is misplaced paternalism. This came out in the legally disabled research I mentioned before. There's this concept of misplaced paternalism, thinking, I don't want to put too much pressure on them. They've just come back from sick leave, or, they have this disability. I don't want to give them this difficult piece of work. We don't even have the conversation with the individual. We may make a massive assumption what they're able to do. Again, paternalism creeps in. So that's just, there's many, many others out there. But one other I will share with you is this idea that hiring disabled people are expensive. Across an average, the average cost of a reasonable adjustment in the UK per employee, do you want to take a guess at what that is, that number?
Per year, per month?
Per year.
5,000?
75 quid.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. Now, of course, there will be some adjustments that are much more expensive, sign language interpreters or technology. But then on the other side of that, there'll be some that are completely inexpensive or free. Noise cancellation headphones, flexible working, working different shift patterns, you know, things like that. But across an average is 75 quid. So that can be a misconception that, you know, how expensive are disabled people? A lot of the accommodations and adjustments are very small, but they make a significant difference to an individual. In my training, actually, the other day, I thought this was an interesting one. There was a policy at work of hot desking. That's quite a common one. There was a lady who had an underlying health condition. I think her immunity was suppressed, or there was some issue there with her immunity. Now, as a result of this policy, again, treating everyone the same, people see equality as treating everyone the same, that had a disproportionate effect on her, that hot desking policy, because she was picking up lots of germs and bugs for other people's germs every time she went to a different desk. Now, as a result, she was off sick a lot. You know, she had to take a lot of sick leave. So they said, okay, for you, let's trial this. Let's change the policy for you. You can have your own desk. Her sickness record dramatically dropped. Because she was just confined in her desk to her own germs and own bugs. And that really, really helped her. So yeah, equality is sometimes recognizing we have to treat people differently.
Wow, that's very, very powerful.
And the point of, I mentioned that, I do go off on a tangent, you probably realize this, is that, you know, that didn't really cost anything. But that was a reasonable adjustment for her, adjusting the policy for her, because of her disability and health condition.
Wow, thank you, Yasmin. Yeah, Yasmin, as a mother of a 2.5-year-old, you know, I mean, like birth itself, as we call it, is like, you know, giving birth to a is like a rebirth for many women. But in your case, being in wheelchair, you know, pregnancy, maternity, birth, and now looking after. Talk us through that journey.
Yeah.
And
oh gosh, we need another hour for that. That's a whole other episode. Yeah, no, you know what I realize is, and this is pertinent to being a disabled person, I also realized when I managed to get pregnant, because I went through 2 cycles of IVF, I'm quite open about that, which is probably one of the most stressful times of our lives, my husband and I, and then actually conceiving and giving birth, I thought, you know something, my body might have done this to itself, paralyzed itself essentially, but how remarkable is the human body that I could carry a life and give birth to a baby. You know, how remarkable my body was. I think a lot of women, actually, I had enormous amount of admiration for women as well, more so when I witnessed other women going through this. I know it's a thing that women do typically is give birth and everything, but I really had an enormous amount of respect for the human body. And I respected my body more, that I was really proud. Not that, you know, some people can't have children and it's really difficult. And I've gone through that journey as well. So I'm not saying, you know, it makes you a superior person or a better person. I just had a really deep appreciation of that experience, because I was fortunate enough to go through it, of actually giving birth and carrying a child to full term. But as a disabled person, it took its toll. You know, it compounded my disability. I was heavier. You know, being pregnant, for some women, if they're fortunate enough, it's a joyful experience. I found it really hard. At the same time, I was really like, wow, my body can do this. But it was hard going. I was sick. You know, luckily I didn't have it as badly as some friends of mine, vomiting. It compounded certain issues, my body. It was hard going. But now I kind of look back and you almost forget it, because the joy that comes from having a child, you know, it comes with challenges as well, is that it was so worth it. So yeah, we've actually set up at Backup, the charity I mentioned, a group for women with spinal cord injuries. And one of the topics we do talk about is, you know, when you use a wheelchair, you have a spinal cord injury, because some people are able to walk, but it affects other residual things in your body. How do you do that? You know, how do you go about navigating all of that, because it's a different thing being a disabled woman being pregnant, and you know, how to ensure that you have good care and how it can impact your body and how do you manage that, all of that. We've set up a specific group for that so that women can talk through those issues. So yeah, it was quite an eye-opening experience, and being a disabled mother is a new thing as well. I mean, I don't know any different. I've never been a mother without a disability, but it comes with its challenges. But I know a lot of people in this world, spinal cord injury world, where a lot of disabled parents, and again, find your tribe, find people who are doing it, learn from them. How do you navigate those challenges? What do you do? Each stage is different, as you know, a child, and it throws up, you think you've cracked it, and never ever think that as a parent, because something else will come along. Well, having a disability on top of that will throw up more challenges and different kind of perspectives. So yeah, I'm learning, I'm making it up as I go along, as most parents are.
Thank you, Yasmin. Yasmin, it's been a very intense talk so far. The last 10 minutes, let's just loosen up and let's talk about initially, what are your hobbies and interests?
Yeah, oh gosh. Well, having a 2.5-year-old, I think when I submitted my bio, I don't have a lot of time left. You know, working, looking after a child, enjoying family life. I mean, that is a hobby in itself. Like life, you know, there's so much to do, isn't there? But I'm in this position where I was thinking about this. I mean, I love just, you know, it sounds really boring, but I just love meeting up with my friends, eating, drinking, having good food, having good chats, talking about nothing in particular, and talking about subjects we deeply, deeply care about and very passionate about. I mean, that's a hobby of mine. But also, I'm in this fortunate position where maybe it's unhealthy, I don't know, but my work is also something I really love. And so the lines are blurred, you know, the things that I read, the YouTube videos I watch, the books that I consume, the content is very much connected to diversity and inclusion and all of these subjects that I really care about. So it's a bit sad, really. My hobby is my work, but my work is my hobby. But I just find all of this very interesting. But, you know, you do need downtime as well, because my husband sometimes says, you need to switch off, stop talking about it. So, you know, I'm really sad. You know, I do enjoy cooking now. I enjoy we just watched the second series, a bit late in the game, of Happy Valley on iPlayer, which I'm really, really enjoying. It was written by a woman, Sally Wainwright. And so I just enjoy a good drama series as well. So I'm afraid I don't have any glamorous hobbies: eating, drinking, talking, and watching Netflix, which is pretty sad, but that's me. I'm owning it.
That's a beautiful part of it, Yasmin. I mean, like, and sometimes what we consider boring is when situation happens, like what happened to you on March 18, 2008. The boring part of what you had was the blessing, right? Today, you all want to do bigger and important stuff, but the boring part is what keeps us, like, that's
same. And actually during the pandemic, maybe we really appreciated the so-called boring. I mean, yeah, a lot of people were watching Netflix and TV at home, but meeting up with friends, you know, having a hug with a friend, feeling that physical contact, going to a restaurant, going to a pub for a drink afterward, all of these things, some of us really valued and they were taken away from us. Well, I really treasure them. Because when I was in hospital, I couldn't do those things. And, you know, the pandemic, a lot of disabled people said, you know, actually during the pandemic, a lot of people appreciated on some sort of level what it might be like to feel disabled, you know, not being able to be restricted in terms of going out and meeting people. You know, they had a bit of a taste of life, and we could learn a lot from disabled people, because we're very used to sometimes being at home. Not saying disabled people stay at home, but what I mean is some people are unable to go out as much as others, or having to you know, get used to not sort of being socially as active as they would be. All of these things we kind of get used to because of periods in hospital, or you know, when we become unwell, or you know, it kind of comes part and parcel with life, that we are used to dealing with those kind of situations.
Totally, Yasmin. Thank you. Yasmin, 3 to 4 random questions, Yasmin, and then we look live. So if you could go back to history and if you could meet an historical figure, who would you meet and why?
Oh gosh, that's so hard. Oh, who would I meet and why? I mean, there's so many living people that I'd like to meet, probably.
Okay, let's go for them.
Well, yeah. Oh God, now I'm making even more issues for myself because I think, who would I like to meet? Do you know, weirdly, I'd probably like to be in a room, this sounds a bit controversial, with 2 people, Michelle Obama and Donald Trump.
Oh, interesting.
Because they're 2 people with very different views, outlooks on life. And I think the problem of the world is we are very polarized.
Yeah.
Could we find some common ground? Could we even vehemently disagree with each other, but find some way to have respectful dialogue? I think this is what's needed in the world. And I'm trying in my training, my facilitation, is to find that middle ground. I vehemently disagree with you. This is my perspective. How do we navigate that now? How do we find a way to coexist in this world, even though we're taking opposing positions? I'm really interested in the grey areas of that. You know, I find it, unfortunately, in the diversity and inclusion world, I think there's too much conformity that we think this is the right way to think. We have to all believe this. And actually, diversity and inclusion should also be, not that you're allowing views to harbour where there's a lot of discrimination and all of it, but where do we find it so that people can have the space to express? I'm not a fan of cancel culture or making people feel that they can't speak, because I think that can be counterproductive. How do we find that middle space? So those 2 people, I think that would be a fascinating dinner party. And I'd have to control myself as well, because, you know, I probably could get triggered by certain things. Yes. But it would be a good test of character to see how you would manage that.
100%. What's Yasmin's favorite food? Like, you would be happy to eat it every meal.
Oh gosh. Well, I'm a creature of habit. I probably have the same. I'm pescatarian, so I don't eat meat, and I haven't since the year 2000 actually. So, but it's probably, what do I love the most? Do like a good curry. I mean, I could probably eat curry every day. Dal, I do like dal, lentils. So, but actually more than that is, if I didn't have a cup of tea, you probably wouldn't want to talk to me. I think I'm addicted to tea. I have 3 cups of tea, Earl Grey tea every day. Oh, wow. And I have to have my tea. Yeah, that's my thing. I don't drink. I do drink, but I don't smoke. And that's my vice. Got to have my cup of tea. Yes. I can't live without that.
Is there any favorite place for Yasmin in the world that you would like to travel to, or you already?
Yeah. Well, this is a subject that, again, it's related to disability, because there are so many places in the world I'd like to see, but being a wheelchair user, getting on a plane, I haven't flown for a while now, is really stressful. You know, you can't keep your chair in the aeroplane, it goes in the holes with the luggage. I would take an old chair because it would probably get smashed or broken, and then therefore I haven't literally got my legs to travel. And then there's the stress of the inaccessibility of a place. So if I was able to walk and move around, you know, without the use of a wheelchair, I would probably have a very different answer to you. So I feel sad sometimes saying that, because that's something I you know, again, I gave advice about, think about what you can do, but that is a reality for me. There's lots of places I'd love to travel, but it just would be so deeply uncomfortable. I'd have to be lifted around, you know, it just wouldn't be enjoyable. But I do like, I am a fan of France, the south of France. You know, we go away. We haven't been for a few years since Bobby, our son, was born, but that's somewhere that I feel very happy. You know, the food, the drink, the culture, the weather. It's just a lovely, lovely sort of lifestyle, and I feel very free and happy there. So I'd be very happy to travel abroad anywhere, to be honest, at the moment, because it's been a few years, but that's my place that I really enjoy.
That's amazing. Thank you, Yasmin. Yasmin, let's talk about Luke. Talk about Luke.
Luke, hopefully he's not listening. Yeah, he's my husband. I met him well, we were friends for a long time. I think I met him in 2008, 2009. We can never remember the year, but he's also a wheelchair user. When I said find your tribe, not necessarily find a husband who also is in a wheelchair, but that just so happened to be my tribe, and I found Luke. But we met at Waterloo Station, outside Waterloo Station. He, at the time, was acting. He had a part in Holby City, no, Casualty, played the brother of a doctor. And my mum is absolutely obsessed with Casualty. And when I was newly injured, I was very fascinated on how disabled people were depicted in storylines in the media. And my mum said, oh, there's a guy in a wheelchair, and did a lot of research on him. He's actually in a wheelchair, you know, and he you know, watch Casualty. And the storyline, I mean, we've evolved now, but back then he was so depressed about being in a wheelchair, he actually takes his own life. And I thought, wow, well, that's a really positive story. Now we've kind of moved on now, and the storylines are very much about the disability is just part of their identity. It's not an all-consuming thing. It's not a tragedy thing. You know, they just happen to be in a wheelchair and they've got full lives. But at the time, that was the storyline, which is quite depressing. Yeah, so that's how we met. I recognized him at Waterloo Station, and we were friends for a long time, and then got officially together 2013 and got married in 2016, and then we had our son in 2020. Yeah, and he's a property developer, property investor, self-employed, and yeah, what else can I say about him? He is one of my role models, because he allowed me to be more confident in using a wheelchair, making me see what was possible. Really, when I was struggling at work and thinking I want to do something else, because he's self-employed, he was very much, you can do this and get experience, and he supported me all the way in my career, which has been an enormous help to me as well. And yeah, so he's got my back.
Oh, that's beautiful. Thank you, Yasmin. Yasmin, I think we talked about Luke, we talked about your parents, we talked about your little one, Bobby. But who are the people who have been the most influential in your life and career, other than this family?
Oh, I think it's probably the charity backup, if I'm honest with you. They are like my second family in a way, because I remember there was a turning point. They do courses for people, and I went to Edinburgh. It's called the Edinburgh City Challenge, with 5 other wheelchair users. And it was a year into my injury. So this is 2009. And I remember, I mean, Edinburgh, if you've been, is very hilly, not ideal for someone in a wheelchair, cobbled streets as well, absolute nightmare. So we were learning how to do all of that. But I remember when I came back from the trip, my friends who call me Yaz said, the old Yaz is back. I have never laughed so much. I remembered rediscovering this sense of joy about life. We went to a comedy club, then it turned into a club, and I love, you know, dancing and music, and I suddenly felt free. And I thought, this is possible. And I just remember that's really probably the first time I thought, I can do this. I can. And I remember one of the team leaders, because you have a team leader, she's in a wheelchair, and actually she's one of my role models as well, Claire. She's a clinical psychologist, and I realized that, you know what, this is a professional woman. She's living her best life. We went to this comedy club, which turned into a club, and she was dancing with a sense of joy and not caring about what people thought. The fact she was in a wheelchair, it was unusual to see someone in a wheelchair in a club. She didn't care. She was just in the moment. And I thought, I want to be just like her. Oh. And you know, I feel emotional even thinking about it now, but I just thought, I can do this. And there are so many moments like that backup have given me, that it makes me, that's why I give back to the charity, because I remember that feeling so distinctly, that, you know, it makes you think what is possible when you meet other people who are doing that. And I could relate to her. She's a professional woman. She's roughly the same age as me. She's now gone on to have a family as well. And, you know, seeing all of that made me really believe that, you know, you can have a fulfilling life and live with a disability, and you can be happy. There will be challenges, yes, but yeah, so really they have given me a lot, and I'm very thankful to them in making me see myself differently, and challenging society when they sometimes put me in a box about how I'm supposed to be. Yeah.
That's beautiful. Thank you, Yasmin. Yasmin, as we close the episode, what's that one advice that either you received from someone or you would like to share it to the listeners?
One piece of advice. That's hard. I would, something someone said to me, it's a quote from someone, I can't remember the person, but it was, be yourself because everybody else is taken. And, you know, when I think of myself, you know, applying myself to this, is that what makes me me is everything I've been through, the good, the bad, the challenges. You know, someone in a session asked me yesterday, do you consider yourself unlucky because of what happened to you? Yeah. And I kind of sort of winced a bit, and it's like, oh, that's a very loaded question. And, you know, yes, what's happened to me is not the norm. It's unusual. It's very rare. But it's me. And actually, whatever we've been through, it makes us us. You know, even the negative experiences make us who we are, alongside the positive ones. I cannot separate now me with the disability. It's not that it consumes every waking moment and it identifies my whole being, but it's such a, you know, you've probably noticed in some of the questions that you've asked, my disability is very relevant to the answer. Like, you know, the place that I'd like to travel. Well, there are restrictions now. You know, it feeds into a lot of my responses to your questions, and I'm very aware of that. But it really does shape a lot of my views and my life, and, you know, what I'm able to do. So yeah, is embrace all of that, the good, the bad, everything. Be yourself because everybody else is taken.
That's very, very powerful. Thank you, Yasmin. Yasmin, as we close the episode, is there any part of your life or career, or is there anything else you would like to share to the listeners?
I think we've covered a lot of ground, haven't we?
Yasmin, totally. Yasmin, thank you so much for joining Bachi Talk Equity Matters. It's been an absolute privilege and honor to have you. Wish you, your family, everybody, all the good health and happiness.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I really enjoyed the conversation.